1 year ago, I was super excited about completing my emergency fund with $15,000. But is $15,000 still enough 1 year later? And if it's not, how do we find out how much is? First, let's talk about the dangers of not having enough money in our emergency fund, because it can be pretty dangerous. Let's say a guy by the name of Mark has an emergency fund of $15,000 in 2021. What a good looking guy. Mark decided on $15,000 because he looked through his budget at the time and it was enough to cover 6 months of his living expenses. That means that if Mark lost his job, he would have 6 months to find another one before he ran out of money. So the emergency fund gave Mark a safety net when it came to his job. But it also gave him something else. It gave him a lot more confidence. And with that confidence, Mark started making YouTube videos about personal finance so that people can learn good money habits that they can use to help them build something of their own, like a business outside of their 9 to 5. And in one of his videos, Mark tells people in their 20s that buying a new car is a big financial mistake. Did you know that the average car payment is over $600? I double checked because I couldn't believe it. So telling people in their 20s to avoid paying over $600 for something that'll sit in their driveway, I mean in the parking lot in their apartment complex, seems like pretty standard advice, wouldn't you say? But there's one big problem with that. Mark is an engineer in the automotive industry, and HR probably won't like him telling people not to buy cars. To which Mark would respond, I'm telling them not to buy a car now so they could buy 2 in the future. But they fire him anyway. Man, it sounds like this Mark guy is really putting his job on the line for you guys. And to make things worse, he finds out that $15,000 is not enough to last him for 6 months. It'll only last him for 4. Thanks, inflation. Oh no, what is this? That's why I wore a hat. Oh, nope. Okay, so how can Mark, or anyone wanting to avoid that fate, find out if $15,000 is enough for their emergency fund? Well, let's check out what some experts have to say, starting with Business Insider. So if we look at the chart from Business Insider, dang, there's a big jump from under 25 to between 25 and 34. Is that because of kids? Anyway, by looking at this chart, it seems like $15,000 is mid for an emergency fund if you're under 24, and it doesn't look like enough if you're older than that. And if you're wondering, they got those numbers using a common rule of thumb for emergency funds that says you should have between 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved. They got the average living expenses of different age groups according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics and multiplied it by 3 and 6. So the smaller amount would be enough to cover 3 months of living expenses and the larger amount would be enough to cover 6. But let's check what other experts are recommending. Okay, 1,000, then 3, at least 1 month, at least 3 months, 6, 8, 12. So we're seeing anywhere from $1,000 to about 12 months, which is not very helpful. Generally, the harder it would be for you to replace your job if you lost your current one, the more you want to have saved. And the more you depend on one source of income, the more you want to have saved as well. But if we meet in the middle, that'll be about 6 or 7 months of living expenses. But now the question is, what exactly does living expenses mean? I know I had that question when I first started my emergency fund, and there's basically 2 answers. One is that living expenses would cover only the things you need and none of the things you want. So think of things like rent, utilities, groceries, gas, some bills, things like that. So basically, if you lost your job, you wouldn't get things like Chick-fil-A or Taco Bell. You know what's crazy? I moved to Michigan like 2 years ago, and that's when I found out that people actually like Taco Bell. I think the first and probably the only time I was actually disappointed with food was with Taco Bell. Like, I don't know what it was. Like, I was eating it and I was like, I'm really upset by this food. Anyway, another answer is that living expenses would cover a normal month of living expenses. This includes both needs and wants. But which one is right for you? The answer is, it depends. I personally use a normal month with the idea that if I did lose my job, I would cut back on things and that 6 months would actually be about 7 or 8. I did this because I wanted to be on the safe side. And here's an example of what figuring out how much you need in your emergency fund looks like. I've got some expenses on the left, and then I have the total for 3 of the last months for each expense. Then I have the average and max cost of the 3 months. You can get the average with the formula average, and you can get the largest with the formula max. Then I have the total of the average and max. You can get the totals with the formula sum. And finally, you can get the 3-month and 6-month totals. And if you want to update this in the future, which I recommend you do at least once a year, you would do the same thing except you would use updated 3 months in the future. Hopefully that made sense. I actually just did that for myself for this video and I found out that $15,000 is still enough to cover 6 months of my living expenses. And now that you know how much you need for your emergency fund, you'll want to watch this video here, which will give you 4 tips that'll make building your emergency fund so much easier.